Hello there, good afternoon, and welcome. Many thanks for always staying tuned to Souk News Television. Once again, welcome to Development Weekly, where we touch on salient issues bordering on developmental and economic growth. It also showcases humanitarian and sustainable development activities by relevant stakeholders, highlighting their impact on socio-economic development. Today, we're discussing empowering youth through education and skills. Now, in a nation where the youth population makes up about 70%, the future of Nigeria lies largely in the hands of its young people. But with rising levels of poverty, unemployment, and increasingly limited opportunities, many young Nigerians face uncertain futures. However, there is some hope. Education and skills training have been seen to invariably equip people and position them for better opportunities and also empower them to transform lives, communities, and some entire nations. From vocational training to STEM education, entrepreneurship to mentorship, we will delve into the ways that Nigeria's young people can gain the requisite skills and knowledge needed to succeed in today's world. Now, joining us in the conversation this morning is the Senior Program Manager, Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa, CAPPA, Ms. Zikora Ibeh. Good afternoon, Ms. Ibeh. Can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon.
Afternoon. Now, let's start by getting your thoughts, albeit very briefly, with regards to some of the challenges that plague Nigeria as a whole, especially the young population who are exposed to a lot of things, both good and bad. So, with regards to that, so let's also take a broad look at the situation regarding our education sector in the country and other, forms of empowerment, if you like, that have been embarked upon, initiatives with regards to empowerment that have been embarked upon by government at all levels, talking about the subnational and the national. There have been a plethora of initiatives so far in recent years. In your view, how would you assess it so far? Very briefly.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think you already made the point at the beginning of your intervention when you said that technical education is very important for equipping individuals with competencies to operate in this. And education as a whole is quite important if a nation is expected to advance or even, reach to its greatest heights in terms of development. But what we've seen over the years in the country is the declining standard of education in Nigeria. Whereas there was a time where our education standards were really, really high, in recent times, we have seen education just go down, and even our spaces for empowering people and young individuals with that requisite knowledge have also declined as the standards have declined. So you go to schools and you see that there are dilapidated structures. There are no facilities for learning that students would require to advance themselves in the kind of knowledge that they should gain. Most particularly concerning is the budgetary allocation to education in this country. Whereas we know that global recommendations have always advised at least 15 to 20% of a country's budgetary allocation to education. What we're seeing in Nigeria is allocation that are not up to that kind of recommendation. We've not even seen a 10% allocation in terms of what we direct to education in this country. It has always flocked out between 5% to 7. I think last year's allocation was 7% to the education sector in this country. What is this sector? They are not enough resources or money to even provide the kind of learning facilities that people need to advance development in this country. And we've seen that, you know, impacts learning quality of students in school. So it means that students are going to school, but they are not learning anything because the facilities for empowering that kind of learning is not available. Well, we've seen in recent time that the government attempted to um, revamp the educational sector in a way of providing loans to students of tertiary institutions to be able to go to school in the form of the NOW Fund, the student loan program. But what we've always argued is that we do not need loans as an intervention in moving the education sector forward because we are still an on we are still developing in a way. And in fact, a lot of people, individuals in the country, do not have money to sponsor themselves in school. The employment, you see a lot of people going to school and coming out without hope for gainful employment. So when you are trying to further the education sector in the country and using loans as an intervention scheme, what we see is, you know, we are not ready to do what needs to be done. And in the work that I do and my organization does, we've gone round since the implementation of the student loan scheme. I know that on the part of the government, it says that a lot of students are taking these loans, but even if from our own end, in the research that we do, we've seen a lot of students also say that they cannot afford to take the loans because they are not sure of the monies that they would get to pay back. They are not sure of employment after school, so that they don't want to burden themselves with such kind of loan that would make them worried after school. So the whole point is, at some point, state authorities and educational authorities in this country need to reassess the kind of intervention that the country really needs to bolster its education sector.
You speak about interventions, when you speak about, because you've mentioned a few of the challenges bedeviling the sector and mentioned some of the socio-economic fallouts, futuristically speaking, where you have an underdeveloped system and, students or learners who are unemployable. That's one of the fallout. Those are some, if you like, of the fallouts. You also mentioned infrastructure and all of that, which is largely tied to budgetary allocations, as you were. However, as far as interventions are concerned, I'm more driven towards the practicability of it therein. So, in your view, what sort of reforms therein or policy, decisions therein would you like to see? That's as someone who is a stakeholder in that regard. What sort of intervention? Because apparently, this is not just you, by the way, since the announcement of the loan program last year or early this year, as case may be, or last year, beg your pardon, it was a mixed bag. Some people were excited about it. Some others, I wouldn't say they weren't excited, but they had concerns. One of the concerns you mentioned, some of the sentiments that they shared, including what would happen post academia, what would happen post education, as the case may be. So, again, in your view, what would you like to see by way of intervention besides this, already existing programs in terms of policy making, in terms of reforms? What would you like to see?
Yeah, so I mean, when we talk about policy reforms, we need to discuss policy reforms in a way that their direct impact is felt, and the outcomes of those reforms are established even right inside the school environment and outside the school environment too. So, for instance, we should have policy reforms that not just that doesn't focus on the financial aspects alone, for instance, the student loan, but in the overall environment of in the overall learning environment itself. Again, in most of our learning spaces, you would find out that there is a disconnect between theory and practical. There's a lot of theory learning, but the facilities to enable that theory, come out is missing. So, for instance, when we talk about technical and vocational education, you go to institutions and there are no laboratories, there are no engineering facilities that can really cushion students, empower them to understand what the new world is all about or what the conventional world is all about. In some instances, even where you have those facilities, the facilities are anachronistic in the sense that they do not match with what you see outside the school environment, meaning that by the time learners are done in such environment, they can't even operate machines or facilities or resources related to the kind of learning that they have gotten in the school when they come outside. So policies need to match the theory in school environments with what is obtainable outside. Again, there is a need to also rejig our curriculum. Our curriculum has remained old school, to say in quotes. Our curriculum has failed to catch up with the times that we are in. So it means that at the time the world is also moving forward or embracing newer ideals or coming in contact with newer lessons, we are still behind in many of our classrooms, learning things that have been in the past that have failed to match up with the times that we live in. So overall, the thing that we need to concentrate on, or state authorities need to concentrate on, is how to prepare learning programs to match the conventional world of skill or what is obtainable outside the country. There's also the issue of training programs for educators and teachers themselves. We have seen in recent times that even when we think about all other things, we tend to forget those people who carry the burden of imparting this knowledge in the students. So there are less and less and fewer training programs for teachers. It means that teachers are not able to revitalize themselves and what they know. You, you, they are not able to revitalize themselves and what they know. And at the end of the day, it is garbage in, garbage out, because when you are operating from when you're operating from a very limited perspective, there's hardly anything you can do to enrich the students. So it's when we talk about what needs to be done, the policy reforms that needs to be done needs to be wholesome. It needs to be comprehensive. It's a whole lot of work, and we need to concentrate on all the point places that need that kind of power and energy for us to reach what we are looking for when we talk about our education sector.
Now, still maintaining that train of thought, there is, or there has been, for all intents and purposes, a very, very huge chasm when it comes to what specific or certain industries in certain sectors need and the requisite skill set or the requisite knowledge to be able to function therein. It's kind of similar to what you've said with regards to theory and then, what they see outside being at odds with each other or at variance with each other. So in that regard, in your view, what sort of skills, first of all, this is like two questions rolled up in one. What sort of skills, first of all, are in demand for Nigeria's emerging industries across the board, and what sort of developmental programs, are needed to be able to bridge that gap and make sure that people who intend to or are enthusiastic about playing in those sectors would not be square pegs in round holes.
Yeah, I think that's for me, the most critical in demand skill or knowledge right now that Nigeria needs is critical thinking. we are short of critical thinking in the country, and it shows in the way that our people engage. And youth who are out of colleges and even universities and higher institutions engage. So there's a dearth of critical thinking in the country. So we need a lot of refreshment in critical thinking in our education curriculum. In fact, when you say what sort of skills, the national policy on education emphasizes that end of at the end of the day, education should be able to equip learners with the competencies to, contribute to the economical upliftment, social upliftment and development. We need interventions in areas that empower learners to think critically, to use their hands as much as they use their heads, right? So we need education in places that are entirely with what the modern world is saying, such as STEM education. Everywhere you turn to, there is the intertwining of technology with our everyday lives. And when you check the school environments in Nigeria, you want to ask yourself, the technology you see, the technological learning or gaining you see in such kind of environment, does it match with what we see in the world that we live currently? What you'd see is that it doesn't. It's still at we need educational investment in the knowledge that helps citizens bridge technology and their everyday life together. Far more than that, like I've said earlier, we need critical thinking. Only critical thinking trainings and and knowledge building would also allow people to be able to sit, to know within themselves what to do at different points in time, how to apply themselves to the betterment and development of the country.
Now, for this to happen, I reckon there will be certain partnerships that are key or that will be pivotal to the actualization of this. I know that the government does its part and they have done a lot, both current and previous government, both at state and the national level, as he were. So let's talk more about the partnerships, the ones that are needed to fast track these sorts of initiatives, like you have mentioned, some of them including critical thinking. How exactly would the effort of one combine seamlessly with the other, talking about the federal government, state government, and then of course, private partnerships, whether that private partnership comes in form of individuals or non-profit organizations or CSOs, as you were. What sort of partnerships are needed to expedite these?
Yeah, thank you. So, the kind of partnerships that are needed are partnerships that expose learners to what is obtainable outside the school environment. And in that sense, we would think about direct partnerships with industries, specialized institutions that also, beyond the four walls of the school, help students come in contact with the kind of knowledge that they are building in school. So you also have like state-sponsored interventions that, help students advance in the kind of in the kind of knowledge that they want to pursue. So in the past, we used to have a situation where in our tertiary institutions, you would have industries and focused or targeted institutions come around in different departments to partner with those students or partner with educational institutions or even offer spaces for gifted students or students interested to come into those kind of environments to learn, to advance. So but right now, even if we have them, they are not as they used to be in the past. So we need those kind of partnerships, collaborations, direct collaborations between educational institutions and partner industries that can also help students see reality outside the school. Beyond that, when we talk about the kind of things that students need, I would keep also saying that if government would also take time to invest in the education sector, it would also help ramp up students' speed with those kind of knowledge that we are proposing. For instance, you have the UBEC funds, that's the Universal Basic Education funds, which states are supposed to provide counterpart funding fund in the country.
Zikora, are you
It's
there?
providing the counterpart funding for assessing that. Yes, can you hear me?
I hear you. Please go on.
Oh, okay. I thought you missed me for a second. So I was talking about state authorities also taking time, to intentionally invest in the education sector by improving budgetary allocations and also providing counterpart funding to such kind of interventions where necessary. Like, for instance, when you talk about the UBEC funding is there, which is supposed to be a counterpart funding between state authorities and the federal government. But what you see is state authorities failing to provide counterpart funding to assess that fund. And so for the better part of the time, and in many states, that fund is lying there unassessed because states are not providing counterpart funding. And this is also responsible for many children going out of schools because funds which would have been directed to empowering such children and providing them with requisite knowledge and education is missing. So apart from collaborating with targeted institutions or industries to also bring students up to speed with what is obtainable outside the learning environment, state authorities need to also intentionally take it upon themselves to say that the education sector is an important sector that cannot be neglected. And it means that they are going to do whatever it takes to allocate fundings, improve what the budget is like for education across every state.
Now, let's, on a final note, talk a little bit about a subset that, for some reason, in some cases, albeit not a lot these days because there's a lot of enlightenment, but still you cannot discountenance, beg your pardon, the fact that they're still largely not totally catered to. I'm talking about the people with, or the subset of individuals with special needs. So let's talk about inclusive education. How far have we gone with regards to that? And what more can we do to make sure that we have more people in that category catered for and not excluded?
I beg your pardon, I missed a better part of what you asked. Could you please go again?
I was talking about inclusive education. How do we ramp up efforts so far, the ones we've had so far, with regards to including people in the category or subset of special needs, learners with special needs? How do we include them all the more? Because, like I mentioned earlier, there's been more enlightenment in that regard, but certainly there has to be some measures aimed at enhancing efforts so far. So, what more do we need to do to increase or to enhance inclusion of folks with special needs?
Yeah, there are so many things that we need to do. First of all, we need to rejig our orientation entirely. There's a whole lot that we need to do in terms of how we think about inclusive education. For instance, our curriculum does not entirely cater to how special needs students should be incorporated into the classroom and some of the things or tools or devices that are needed to also guarantee them the kind of access that would help them catch up with other other learners in the school environment. So when you look at the school environment, it seems like the school environment is binary in the sense that it only sees people it wants to see. It doesn't see people outside that circle that it is seeing. So we need to rejig our curriculum. Then again, the 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 the, the training programs for educators too needs to be reviewed. when we talk about training programs, again, we look at training programs from the aspect of what is conventional. We don't also look at training programs in the sense of what is wholesome and what can respond to the different facets of society or different groups of society. So you go to many training schools for teachers, and there is also an absence of training programs for special needs teachers, and that's why you also discover that in our environment we rarely have special needs teachers. Those teachers are missing when you talk about the whole educational environment as a whole. So we need to recognize that special needs children or learners are also as important as other kinds of learners in the school environment. And so for us to be able to make the learning environment inclusive, we need to rethink curriculum, we need to rethink teacher training programs, we need to also rethink how people like that are also absorbed in society and also make their parts easier, the same way we try to make the part of other people easier to be absorbed in society.
All right, many thanks for joining us and sharing your time with us, Ms. Zikora Ibeh. Many thanks for joining us on Development Weekly today. Ms. Ibeh is the Senior Programs Manager at CAPPA Africa, talking about corporate accountability and public participation. Many thanks again for being a part of the program this afternoon. Thank you.